Posted by user King Riri. Classroom Ghost. So these are my mom's experiences, but now that I've discovered this community, I just have to share. My mum is a photography teacher for high school students. The school she taught at recently was in a very old school building built in the late 1800s. She moved schools this year, but these are her encounters while she taught there. She teaches commercial photography. Her classroom consisted of a regular room for lecturing and computers for editing, along with a shooting studio attached to the classroom by a door. There is a window between the two rooms so you can see who is in the studio and classroom and vice versa. In the studio, there is a hallway that branches off and leads to little dark rooms where you can develop film. It was a large space overall. She had been told that there were ghosts in the school, primarily in the theater where drama kids would hear footsteps on the stage or upstairs when nobody was there. She quickly learned that the ghosts were not just in that space. One day, she was giving a lecture when something strange happened during the lesson. A rechargeable battery pack was plugged into one of the outlets. They used rechargeable batteries for the cameras they used because they were cheaper. She was in the middle of a lesson when one of the battery packs shot out from the outlet and went across the floor, probably 15-20 feet from the wall. She stopped lecturing and everyone in the classroom just kinda looked at each other like, what the hell was that? The only logical explanation we've come up with was some sort of electrical shock, but seems unlikely considering there was no pop or spark and it traveled so far across the room. Another time, she was sitting at her desk against the wall where the door to the studio was. The students were on their computers editing photos. The door to the studio was open. They all begin to hear a noise, plain as day, starting from the studio and coming into the classroom. She described it as somebody dragging it up across the floor with a heavy box on it. Just scooting across the floor like CHHH. CHHHH. CHHH. And everyone stared at the floor and followed it with their eyes. One student ran out crying, she was so scared. That same girl came back a few days later with holy water and sprayed it throughout the classroom. One time, when my mum was alone in the classroom, she needed to develop some film. She did not want anyone opening the door and letting light in and ruining the process, so she locked the door from the school hallway to her room, the door from the classroom to the studio, and closed the darkroom door. As she's developing photos, she hears a woman talking outside the darkroom door, as if it was in the studio. She recognized the voices and was confident it was her mother-in-law and her husband talking, which would not be unusual because her husband was a teacher at the same school and he came into her room a lot, and had a key. She wrapped up what she was doing, came out into the studio, and nobody was there. The voice stopped. The studio door and classroom door were still locked. I was a model one time for her students in the studio and had to go into one of the dark rooms to change outfits. I had been told all these stories and was so scared to go back there and strip. Felt like someone was watching me the whole time. Hated that place. Posted by user Sabertooth Dude. Encounter over London. My name is Jake. I'm a Royal Air Force pilot from the UK and I do flight patrols over the Channel and over British territory, and before I start, this is a true story. One night I was woken up to do a late night patrol. Being in the Royal Air Force, this isn't a rare event, due to the fact of the recent terror attacks in the UK. About an hour had passed after I entered my jet, and I was crossing over London when out of nowhere an old fighter plane appeared. Me being an expert on old planes, due to my past obsession with them, could easily tell it was an old Mk1A Spitfire. But what I didn't understand was why there was an old plane up in the sky so late. See, today our jets have radar and the technology to tell where we are and etc. But what also came across my mind was why it was even here at all, especially in our airspace. I called to base and was told to wait to see if anyone had permission from any airfields in the area to fly. When they came back negative, I was told to watch the plane and make sure it wasn't lost or a threat to the city. I knew Spitfires were around during the Battle of Britain. Me being very spooked and curious, I pulled in to get a closer look, when suddenly the pilot turned and looked at me. When I saw it, I nearly lost control of my jet. He had blood all over his face. His cockpit riddled with bullet holes. I told base what I saw, and was told to return back home and to get some rest. The next morning I woke up and told my colleagues what I had witnessed, and they laughed at me, so I went to the internet for help. It turned out I wasn't the only person to see this ghost plane. An old story popped up of an old Spitfire being seen flying over the city of London on the same day the battle for Britain ended 14 years later, and it messed with me a lot, so I looked into it more, and found out that the first sighting was in 1954 when an old Gloucester Meteor fighter pilot noticed it exactly where I had met the ill-fated pilot. After this experience and the research to back it up, I got a transfer to a base near Dover. After that I haven't experienced another encounter with the old fighter plane, and I decided to make this article to help any future pilots who bump into this ghostly brave soul, and help them understand why he may still feel he has a duty to serve his country. Posted by user Moopy1221. Something picked me up and swung me around. So this happened when I was a kid and I will never forget this, and the crazy thing, it also happened to my mom weeks later in the same room at my grandma's house. My question is, has anyone else ever experienced anything like this, or what do you think it could have been? My grandma's house has something malevolent in it. We've experienced several things in her house while living there as kids. One incident was when I was sleeping in my grandma's room on a pull-out bed, and she always left her door open at night, and the hallway was visible from where I was sleeping. Well, this particular night I was awoken out of my sleep by something calling my name. I wake up and look down the hallway and I saw only a face. And it was illuminating, and it was talking to me, and it said, "Jesus isn't your friend, he didn't die on the cross for you, I'm your friend." Now at this age I didn't really know much about Jesus, but it said that to me. I screamed but no one would wake up. That terrified me. Fast forward to when I was 12 years old. My bedroom at my grandma's was always cold, and she lived in Biloxi, MS. And it's always hot and humid there, but that room stayed cold. Well, this night I was in a deep sleep, and once again I was woken up by something calling my name. So I wake up and look to the end of the bed and see this tall dark figure standing there, and on the sides of the bed it was like two smaller dark figures on each side. It scared the hell out of me. So I pulled the covers over my head and closed my eyes. Then suddenly I felt as if I raised up out the bed and was floating there in midair. Then I felt myself slowly start to spin, and then it got faster and faster and I physically heard it in my ear. The spinning sound like rushing wind. It was strange. Then all of a sudden I felt as if I was thrown back on the bed and back in my body. I sat up immediately and screamed at the top of my lungs. This time my grandpa runs in, and when I told him, he didn't believe me and said I just had a nightmare, but it wasn't, it literally happened. It was terrifying. So a few weeks later, my mum was sleeping in the room by herself one night. My sister and I was sleeping together in another room, and in the middle of the night my mum comes in our room and gets in the bed with us. The next day I asked her why did she come in bed with us, and she described the exact same thing that happened to me. It happened to her. So many things happened in that house, too many to actually put into this, but it was very malevolent. It felt like my grandma would tell us to leave her ghost alone. That thing was evil. Has anyone even remotely experienced anything similar to this? And just to add, that face I saw illuminated was a long skinny face. It was terrifying. I will never forget.